since we have everything rolling, just run me through how did your takeoff briefing look that day, and tell me about what went down and why you were so prepared for it.
Your before takeoff briefing, you could just be going through the motions and just, okay, I'm just saying the words I'm supposed to say.
We all hope for a routine flight, but the best pilots expect otherwise.
Or you make it like an oath to yourself that says, if this happens, this is what I will do. Not just this is what I'm supposed to say. We say, or train as you fly as you train. Well, brief as you're going to fly it, and then for the love of all things, then fly it as you briefed it. Otherwise, there's no point in briefing. I think the follow-through is the big thing. So after analyzing it, there was 3 seconds from when Kyle said there's birds. And I can tell you exactly what the thought process was in those 3 seconds. But it would take 3 minutes to explain the 3 seconds thought process, right? You know what? I've been using like one little 64 gig micro card. I'll just send you that whole card.
Cool, man. Well, yeah, that was awesome to see. So I think this is going to be a cool thing to intercut with that footage. So if you can package up what we shot and the footage you've got with the stills you've got, I'll try to cut something together.
Ryan's been a longtime friend and mentor. He's an air traffic controller and a highly experienced pilot, and he's been helping coach me through preparation for the instrument flight test, which I'm quite close to now. So this footage is coming from one of those recent coaching sessions I did with Ryan. And when you work with Ryan, he doesn't just ship you the footage. He sent me a whole care package with a challenge coin from the BC General Aviation Association. I want to plug his services here. I paid in full for it, but he does a really great job, and I definitely want to plug him.
Yeah, we took 2. They're in 3 large pieces. They're overflying you? Yeah, they were perched on the runway, and while we were going down, they decided to go airborne, and I knew I was going to hit them, but there wasn't much I could do there.
Well, it's like yesterday when I had my incident there with the Seagulls. We were doing an 8 a.m. departure. Okay, I live like 15 minutes from the airport. I was at the airport at 6:15. And they're like, why are you here so early? I just like taking my time. I don't like being rushed, and I just like getting everything done. I got the airplane ready. And so that they got on, and like your head's in the right place, you're good to go.
And if you're not familiar with some of the previous episodes we've done with Ryan, there's quite a few in the back catalog now, including a multi-part series about the survival shakedown in the mountains of BC, trying to live with nothing but the survival kit in your aircraft, and going flying with him over Vancouver, showing my family around, and offering some unique insights that can only come from a pilot that's also an air traffic controller.
Yeah, so we were taking off it was going into like hard IMC. The weather's nasty here. I had 5 people on the airplane, and all of them were pilots. So there's 6 pilots in an airplane. Even when there's not pilots, I'll still do an out loud verbal departure briefing. And so that starts with what happens if things go wrong. What happens if things go really wrong? And then lastly, what happens if everything goes right? Because that's what we hope for, but what we need to be least prepared for. So it's the same departure briefing every time. In that airplane, we talk about if any malfunction occurs before 85 knots. And a lot of people zero in on engine failure. Well, there's so much more that can happen. Then there goes any malfunction after 85 knots with insufficient runway, any malfunction after 85 knots with sufficient runway, etc., etc. So we briefed the whole thing, pulled out on the runway, we got our takeoff clearance, and full power going down the runway. And Warwick, the guy in the back, I didn't know this, he was videoing like over my shoulder, so you see this whole thing. And I didn't realize that the takeoff roll is really only about a 24-second event. Like it feels so much longer when you're actually doing it. And we're going down the runway, and I remember Kyle goes, there's birds, and I look up, and it wasn't like 2 birds, it was like 20 birds on the runway. And like big ass seagulls. After watching the video like 50 times, right at that moment you can see my hand kind of shift on the throttle, and I had my pinky up on it's like full power, I had my pinky on the prop lever, and these 2 fingers kind of casually there, and you can see the fingers kind of do a little hook. And then you count 1, 2, 3, and you hear slap, and then the power go to idle. So after analyzing it, there was 3 seconds from when Kyle said there's birds. And I can tell you exactly what the thought process was in those 3 seconds. So you see the birds, and my first thought is, okay, well, I could just try and reject now, but if I reject now, I'm still going to hit them. And if we rejected every time we saw birds on the runway, we'd never go flying, right? So, okay, we'll scrap that idea. So option 2 is we keep going and hope that they scram. Except the problem was right where they were on the runway was right about where my rotate point was going to be. So airspeed's creeping up on, VR, and we're in the Navajo doing, coming up on 85 knots, which is right where I normally rotate. I'm like 100 feet from these birds. and then I've got crap weather right on top of me. Like, what do you do? So I just held it on the ground for like an extra 3 seconds, because I figured if I'm going to hit him, I'm going to take it on the ground. And I'll deal with this on the ground, because I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not taking a damaged airplane into hard IMC, because there's no quick way to get back into this airport. It's a 15-minute ordeal if we have to go and do an approach. That was the thought process in 3 seconds. Those were my options. And hand moved and got to 85 knots, which is right at the rotate speed, and then we heard the schmack, and then there was just meat down my window, and I figured, okay, well, one went through the left prop, so right away, throttled idle, not quite max braking, but as max as I could get on a really wet runway, used all the runway, turn around, come back, told the tower, just leave my flight plan there, well, I think everything's fine, we're just going to go have a look, and I'll probably be back out here in 5 minutes. And we go in, and smell the bird on the side of the airplane. And we shut down, and Kyle looks out on the right wing. He goes, "Is the wingtip supposed to be like that?" I'm like, "Ooh, that doesn't look good." And I'm like, "Just stay here." And I went around, and that's where I took that picture. And the whole outside 1.5 feet of the right wing is basically just like pushed up flat. So, okay, we're done for the day. And went and parked the airplane, hopped in my car, and the runway's now closed. And I called the tower on the phone. I said, "Hey, look, like, can I drive out on the runway? I want to get pictures of these birds just for the insurance." He said, so he gave me a basic taxi clearance onto the runway on the phone. Drove out there, got pictures of the massacre that had happened on the runway. Yeah, I played it over and over a lot, and I don't think I'd do it again any differently. But unfortunately, damage is damage, and damage was done, but what do you do, right?
So I mean, the moral of the story there is that your pre-takeoff briefing is like a Bible that you do not violate, and then you also therefore do not need to spend time making a decision. So in the sense, that was in the category of, we've had a problem on the ground, we're keeping it on the ground.
Yeah, so that fell into the category of any malfunction after 85 knots with sufficient runway remaining, I will reject. It's like an approach briefing is no different. It's one thing we can all read a plate. I can read English, you can read English, we can recite numbers. But if we don't understand what it is we're briefing, and we're not prepared to actually follow through on it, there's no point in even briefing.
Yeah, and then talking about the turn back debate, right? A lot of people are like, when would you attempt the turn back? It's like, this shouldn't be a conversation that you have, like, it should be a decision you make in your pre-flight briefing, is like, am I going to attempt to turn back below whatever altitude? And if the answer is no, then your briefing says, if the engine fails, or if I have a problem at 800 feet, I'm landing straight ahead.
Totally.
But before that, it's not on the table.
I think like 2 things came of this, like for me in thinking of it after the fact, is you're talking about the turn back. The other thing is just, especially for IFR pilots or VFR pilots really, is the idea of personal minimums as well, even with the weather. Like, you ask somebody what's your personal minimums, and they get to like kind of make them up on the spot. It should be like, my personal minimums are, and they pull out a card from their wallet and they've actually defined it for themselves, and there's no question. And they can change over time. In the commercial world, when I was flying commercially, there's rules in terms of like balance field length, and the runway has to be long enough to reach your takeoff decision speed, and then reach 35 feet over the end of the runway, or come to a complete stop and still have a buffer on top of that. In non-commercial GA flying, and that's what this flight was in this airplane, there's no requirement to have that balance field length. So it's basically, okay, well, the books say I can be off the ground by the end of the pavement, I'm good to go. And there's a couple airports that, you know, I fly this thing into where we use all the runway on the way in and out. And luckily, yesterday was on a 5,000 foot runway where I got to go to takeoff speed plus a little bit and still be able to stop on a wet runway. Had I been at a shorter place, like, you basically had to go flying. There's no choice. And that's where you fall into the, if there's a malfunction, you know, at 85 knots with insufficient runway, we're going flying. Well, then you have to commit to go flying.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because you would have had to have done the calculation to realize, like, before my takeoff today at this airport, I do not have sufficient runway remaining when I get to rotation speed. So it's almost one of those situations like a jet where you take your hand off the throttle, like, but you wouldn't. But it's like, we aren't pulling back the power unless it's a dire like VMC roll situation where we're going in the trees, because that's better than flipping over.
Right, but then there's the age-old argument of, do I take a damaged airplane in the air, or am I better off to have it controlled on the ground and just go through the fence at the end of the runway? We could have this discussion all night long, but at the end of the day, decide what you're going to do in advance and stick to it.
We're making an episode that follows Ryan do the ferry flight to get this airplane to the repair facility. It's really cool to watch this in real time. It was so solid that I basically didn't edit it. His professionalism and attention to detail is inspiring.
Okay, here we go, I guess. Wish me luck.
So until next time, keep your flight chops sharp.
Alright, we're going to leave no runway behind us on this one in case we do need to reject for control issues. We're going to have everything available.
Chile Bravo Bravo Tower, just use caution. Birds are reported around the vicinity of Charlie and runway 26 left. Left downwind departure, cleared for takeoff, runway 26 left.
Tower, we're going to decline the takeoff clearance. We're ferrying this airplane due to a Seagull strike the other day, so we'd like the birds cleared before departure, please.
Chile Bravo Bravo Tower, roger, then exit the runway to taxify onto Alpha and hold short runway 26 left.
Okay, we're going to exit on Alpha, and we'll hold short 26 left, Chile Bravo Bravo.
Uniform 2 Delta.
Okay, so we're in position and the airport just reported birds exactly where we hit them on Saturday. So
Did you want the
Tower wanted to get us out so they could get an arrival on, and I'm going to say poo-poo to that. Because, yeah, if we're going to mitigate risk, we're not going to risk taking another Seagull to an already Seagulled up airplane. So if that means we got to taxi clear and hold short and wait, so be it.